A lot of people are saying that the UFC is running out of stars and there's really no face of the UFC like there once was. That being said, we're going to go through the biggest problem with every next face of the UFC. Ilia Topuria is probably the first person you think of that could be the new biggest face of the UFC. Some people think he already is. He has a fan-friendly fight style. He's the most skilled fighter in the UFC. He has crazy knockout power. He's destroying legends. And he's in a division where there's the biggest fights. He's at lightweight. That's notoriously the biggest division with the biggest names. But I think the biggest problem with Topuria and what's stopping him from becoming the undeniable face of the UFC is the fact that he's kind of inactive. His fight before Charles Oliveira was in October, and his next earliest fight possibly is in December. I think at best, Ilia Topuria is going to fight 2 times a year, and as he gets better wins, I think he's going to fight even less and chase bigger fights. And those fights will be big, but he can only have so many big fights. There's only Islam Makhachev, possibly a welterweight move. Other than that, there's one guy, maybe Paddy Pimblett. There's no real huge fights, and he's not a guy like Conor McGregor, where Conor McGregor would fight all the time and he would fight anybody and the fight would be huge. I don't know if Ilia Topuria can reach that level, and I think the inactivity is going to make it harder for him to reach that level. I think possibly we get a fight in December and maybe he fights Paddy Pimblett, but after that I think he's going to wait out for a Makhachev fight, and I think we all know that's just going to take forever. But the second problem I see with Ilia Topuria is the fact that he's going to retire early. He's not going to stick around to become a face of the UFC for very long. I think he has 2 more years left, max. If he loses against Islam Makhachev, he'll probably retire. If he becomes a 3-division champion, he's definitely going to retire. I think he will only chase big fights. And if he cements himself as the clear face of the UFC, that's only going to last for probably like a year. But a lot of people think that Islam Makhachev could be or is the face of the UFC. But the big thing about Islam Makhachev that I think is holding him back from becoming the biggest star in the sport is the fact that he doesn't have that superstar fight style. He has a fan-friendly fight style. He gets knockouts, he gets submissions, but he doesn't have the fight style of an Ilia Topuria, of a Conor McGregor, of an Alex Pereira, where they knock people out early with striking. Islam Makhachev doesn't really have that. And yes, he finished Volk in the first round with a head kick, but the way Islam Makhachev really wins his fights is through the grappling. We saw Dustin Poirier. It was a war in the striking, but the way he actually won that fight was taking Dustin Poirier down and having the threat of the grappling. The way he beat Moicano, he took him down, he submitted him. And I think especially when he goes up to welterweight and he fights more rangier guys, where he's going to have more difficulty striking with them, what he's going to become is more of a heavy grappling control style fighter, which I don't think is a style that will make him the clear biggest, most watched fighter in the UFC. But the newest champion in the UFC is Tom Aspinall, and he's actually had a massive boost in popularity just off of the whole controversy with him and John Jones. I think that actually made him way more well known than if that never happened. And we all know Tom Aspinall's fight style is very fan friendly. Early knockouts, that's pretty much what every big star of the past had. But I think there's 2 problems stopping from Tom Aspinall being the face of the UFC. And the first one is that he has no opponents to fight. All the people that he could face, nobody's really interested in. To have a big fight, you need people to be torn on who's going to win. With Tom Aspinall versus a guy like Derek Lewis or some of these other just horrible contenders at heavyweight, nobody thinks they have any chance of beating Tom Aspinall at all. And when those are the contenders he's going to end up having to fight, his fights are just not going to be as anticipated, and he's not going to be as big of a star from that. He has the off chance of Alex Pereira coming up or Ankalaev eventually coming up. Other than that, if he's active especially, he's not going to have that many opponents to fight or to make a name off of. But the second issue is that Tom Aspinall doesn't really have the personality of a big star. And a lot of people say, well, if you be yourself, fans will like you. But to be an actual huge star, you have to have a big, confident personality. We see Ilia Topuria, that's the first example. He's one of the most outspoken, confident fighters in the UFC. Conor McGregor, obviously, you know how he talks. The only exception of that's really like Khabib. But I think it's the fact that he just beat Conor McGregor, who's such a big star, and he took the hype off him. Tom Aspinall doesn't have that personality, and he doesn't have an opponent that he can gain hype off of. So I think he's going to have a really hard time of becoming the face of the UFC unless there's just nobody else and he's the only dominant champion in the UFC. Khamzat Chimaev faces Dricus du Plessis in a couple of weeks, and Khamzat has the potential to become a huge star in the UFC if he beats Dricus and becomes champion. We all know the hype Khamzat Chimaev has and had even when he was debuting in the UFC. 3 fights into his UFC career, he was almost being talked about more more than any other champion in the UFC when he was still unranked. If he finishes Dricus in the first round or he gets a dominant performance, his hype will be insane. I think he will already almost become one of the biggest stars in the UFC next to Topuria, but I think there's a couple things holding him back from becoming the undeniable biggest star of the UFC for years to come, and it's the fact that he's so inactive, even more so than Topuria. Khamzat Chimaev actually fights once a year, and if he doesn't up his activity, I think people will start to forget about him. I know he's champion and he's going to have big championship fights, but we saw what happened already where he pulled out with injuries and his career got delayed. I think a lot of the hype kind of dwindled off of Khamzat Chimaev, and if he keeps being this inactive, I think he won't be able to reach the status that he could if he fought 2 times a year or 3 times a year. I think if he becomes the face of the UFC, it's going to be if he becomes more active and he fights opponents at least twice a year. If he gets 2 title defenses a year, then he'll be more relevant than he is if he just fights every October or every August. But the other thing that I don't think many people talk about or realize is that there's not many big contenders that he can fight. And there are plenty of contenders at middleweight that are deserving, but those contenders don't have very big names. This isn't like lightweight where you can fight Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, Paddy Pimblett. This is a division with the biggest name is Adesanya and Strickland, 2 guys that probably won't even be able to get a title shot. If Adesanya and Strickland both don't get title shots, he's going to have to fight somebody like Imavov or Baralho or DDP for a rematch. And those fights aren't massive fights, to be honest. Not like a fight where it's Topuria versus Oliveira or Khamzat versus DDP. There's not going to be that much of it after Khamzat wins. And I think the only chance he has is if he goes up a weight class and tries to fight the champion there, or if you get some contenders with bigger names emerging from that division, because right now the top contenders at middleweight don't have the biggest names. But if I had to make a prediction out of these 4 fighters, I think the one who's most likely to become the face is Ilia Topuria, and some might argue he's the face right now, but there's other fighters who are pretty close in contention, so it doesn't seem like there's one set face of the UFC right now. I think Topuria has a chance of actually becoming the undisputed biggest star of the UFC. If he beats Islam Makhachev, I think that's the way he does it. But the question after that is, will he continue fighting after that? I don't think so, but that's who I think is most likely to become the biggest face of the UFC. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.